Dear students of class 8A and 8B, today I am going to teach you about the following points: political causes, economic causes, social and religious causes, military causes. Lesson number 11, topic Revolt of 1857. Now, political causes. Before discussing about the political causes, I would like to introduce some important points for your better understanding. That is, the Indians who antagonized the British in order to bring them under their control. The British passed one act. That act is known as Charter Act of 18. Earlier, the British passed one act, that is Charter Act of 1813, and later on, the British passed another act in order to capture the Indian people who was antagonizing against them, in order to catch them, and in order to arrest them, in order to punish them. The British passed one act before 7 years before. The process was started 7 years before. In the year 1850, the British passed Legislation Act. In the year 1850, it was passed. Now, what was the intention of the British? The British supported the conversion of Indians to Christianity, and the converts were allowed to inherit ancestral property. But at the same time, Indian Orthodox people, conservative peoples, they thought that it was nothing but a step taken by the British in order to convert them from Hinduism to Christianity. The heart of the religious sentiments of the Indian people. And another point that now I would like to discuss this point, that is, the British from the very, very beginning were alert about 2 points. Number one point that was very important: political causes. The Britishers knew that under the circumstances led to the growth of political consciousness among the Indian people. Initially, it should be suppressed because the Indian people were going to be united against the British policy, of oppression. Although the revolt, began as a military uprising, and its causes were deeply rooted. Its causes were deeply rooted in the changing conditions, and drew its strength from several elements of discontent against the British rule. So, number one, the political causes. The political causes. The policy of annexation during the administration of Lord Dalhousie was especially resented. There are certain points behind this. Number one, the policy of doctrine of lapse, by which the states of Hindu princes and Rani of Jhansi, Nana Sahib, etc., were taken over in the absence of the natural heirs. Number two, the false allegations of misgovernance or misgovernment as a valid plea for the annexation of Ayodhya. Third point, his proposal to remove the titular head, the Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah II, from the ancestral palace in Delhi. And last of all, the racial discrimination and arrogance. Racial discrimination. And so these are the important political causes. Now I'd like to discuss it in detail. The people of India, the Indians were paid quite low salary as compared to the British soldiers. The Indian soldiers were paid quite low salary as compared to the British soldiers, and the extra allowances, the extra allowance that was given to the Indians during the battle fought outside the country, it was suddenly withdrawn. Besides, General Service Enlistment Act of 1856 made it compulsory for all the Indian soldiers to serve the British to serve the British to serve the British purpose of overseas, means crossing Black Seas. And another important factor that is also important is causes, economic causes. What are the economic causes? Economic causes. You know, the British uh, exploitation, the British economic exploitation led to the destruction of Indian cottage industries, Indian small scale industries. Almost all people who are involved in in handicraft industries, basically craftsmen, craftsmen and other people who are involved in producing handicraft industries through their small scale industries, they all became jobless. Apart from this drain of wealth and destruction of industry due to flooding of British machine-made goods, also uh, gave a birth of discontentment among the Indians, because artisans, craftsmen, they all became jobless people. Besides, oppressive agrarian system, and new land revenue system ruins of peasantry, ruined, ruined of peasantry, and talukdar zamindars who were there, their interest also was not safeguarded. So but still they remain silent. Apart from this, apathy towards famines also were there, because during famines the British could not provide proper facilities to the countrymen. So countrymen were deprived of their legal rights and facilities. The British remained silent. Another one, social and religious causes. Social and religious causes. In India, the British introduced Western education, and Christian missionaries started it. Christian missionaries started establishing schools, colleges. Also, social legislation act also was passed. Interference of religious and cultural practices also had become a great cause of dissatisfaction among the Indians. And before the revolt of 1857, there had been a growing suspicion among the Hindus and Muslims. This is military cause. Before the revolt of 1857, the Hindus and Muslims, there was a rumor in the Hindu and Muslim soldiers that the British were trying to destroy their religious culture through social legislation. For example, the British, started converting Indians to Christianity. They started converting Indians to Christianity. And the Christian missionaries also took initiative to establish schools, colleges to provide education, modern system of education among the Indians, which created extremely discontentment among the Indian people. British annexation of Ayodhya also was another factor. British annexation of Ayodhya, bringing the false allegation of misgovernance and other, principalities like Jhansi and Satara, these also were annexed by the British. So this annexation policy of the British, through their own through their own technique and own method, own system, resulted in nationwide dissatisfaction and uncertainty. Uncertainty, why? Because the Indian people, all the Indian people started organizing an agitation against the British rule. Who? Basically the soldiers. The soldiers started agitation against the British because of their mismanagement in the system of military department by the British. Apart from this, the Nawab of Ayodhya was a very respectable person, but the annexation of Ayodhya by bringing false allegation against him and dethronement of Nawab of Ayodhya and his exile to Calcutta on the charge of misgovernance created dissatisfaction and widespread grief and great loss. So these annexations displaced not only the Nawab, but also led to the dispossession of talukdars, zamindars. Moreover, some zamindars remained silent. Why? Because they had loyalty. They were loyal for the British. They were loyal to the Britishers. But the grievances of the peasants and farmers were carried over into Sipais. But at the same time, the Sipais and the Sipais organized themselves in order to protest against the oppressive oppressive system of the British. The British policy of oppression made them organizing a revolt, and this revolt is known as the Revolt of 1857. This revolt first started at Berhampur, and that wave of anger reached far and wide Meerut, Ayodhya, and place Lucknow, and so many important places of India where the revolt scattered, and people of our country, India, they not directly but indirectly supported the stance of the soldiers, and it is due to that reason this involvement and this involvement created a large majority among the Indian Indian people who were against the British rule, those who remained loyal to the British. Now they also became a part of the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857. So neither the leaders nor the Sepoys were inspired by any high ideals of patriotism and nationalism. Why? Earlier that system was there. Neither the leaders nor the Sepoys were inspired by any ideals, any prospect of patriotism and nationalism. But after that incident, when the British forced them to organize a revolt, and the revolt of 1857 started, and the people of India, for the first time, they started protesting against the British. They organized movement against the British, revolt against the British for the first time. And for the first time, they all were inspired by the ideals of patriotism and nationalism. It belonged to their country. They had right to protest the oppressive laws, oppressive policies of the British. This country did not belong to the British, but it belonged to their own country. So they had full right to make them out of the country, to protest them, to protest their oppressive policies, oppressive rules. So for the first time they realized it, and introduced their identity that they belong to this very country, India. They were Indians. They were not Britishers. So the annexation of Ayodhya of Lord Dalhousie also, was widely resented in India in general because the people of Ayodhya had great respect for their Nawab, and at the same time there was a widespread sense of grief among the contemporary age, and apart from these peasants were